I knew these people. They were in love with each other.
She's leaving the bay.
He was kind of raggedy and wild. She was very beautiful, you know? And he loved her more than he ever felt possible.
The winner of the Golden Palm at the Cannes Film Festival and one of the most acclaimed films of the decade.
Harry Dean Stanton, Nastasia Kinski, Dean Stockwell, Aurore Clement, and introducing Hunter Carson.
Paris, Texas.
Is there something, I don't know, is there something I can do for you?
Paris, Texas.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Movie Matters. I'm Kevin.
Jake.
And this is, we're talking about Paris, Texas from 1984, directed by Wim Wenders, starring Harry Dean Stanton. So I've never seen this movie, and it's listed on a bunch of lists of, great 80s movies, and I went in completely blind. I really didn't know what the movie was about, and I was surprised, I guess. What about you, Jake?
Yeah, I watched it after you, so I knew it was not going to be like an action-packed thriller. But yeah, I mean it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, and you've never seen it before, right?
No, I had not.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different from the movies we've been reviewing. It's, not an action movie. It's not, a lot of people don't know about this movie at all. Like, I've heard about this movie kind of growing up a little bit, but I never, looked into it at all. But then, looking at lists of 80s movies and what's good and all that, like what's critically acclaimed, this was high on the list. Looking on IMDb, I like looking at a lot of the user reviews of what people say, because usually those are more realistic in my opinion, and a lot of people gave it really high scores. So I was like, oh, okay, this movie's probably going to be really good. I enjoyed it. It was interesting. There's a lot to dissect in it. Almost too much. It's like overwhelming in a sense to dissect it. But I think you're. What did you say to me with your text when you texted me after you watched it?
I said, well, I didn't dislike it.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, that pretty much sums it up for the most part. Like, I didn't dislike it, didn't, love it.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is that I think we both appreciate it. I wouldn't necessarily rank it as one of my favorite movies of all time.
Agreed.
Yeah, like you said, there's a lot. Like it's very like contradictory because there's a lot going on in the movie, like almost at all times, but there's not a lot actually happening in the movie. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. You'll have to see it to believe it. But
yeah, it's lots of like subtexts and imagery, kind of like painting thematic pictures throughout the movie.
Yeah. So quick little thing before we kind of get really into it, but a lot of people have been asking me about this particular podcast and if they should watch the movie before they listen to our podcast or watch our podcast. In a perfect world, yes. Watch the movie before, and then you come and listen and dissect it with us. That's in a perfect world. You don't have to watch the movie if you don't want to, but in an ideal world, yes, watch the movie. That's the whole goal of the podcast.
It'll probably be more engaging if you've seen the movie before watching the episode. Yeah,
definitely. So, so this movie shot beautifully. Like my eyes were glued. Yeah, my eyes were glued to the screen like the entire time because the cinematography was just fucking breathtaking. And this, like, A lot of shots, at like dusk or like right as the sun's setting or like right as the sun's rising. A lot of beautiful scenery. That was probably my favorite aspect of the entire movie. It's just how beautiful it was shot.
Yeah, the cinematography, the setting, and the music are all absolutely phenomenal. They take a lot of desert landscapes and like desolate kind of scenes and just make them absolutely gorgeous, and it's just very well done. The music is very like western and blues guitar,
Yeah.
very very fitting to the overall like theme of the movie. Just extremely well done. Yeah, and like some of the like there's a few like specific scenes that are shot like at dusk that are just unbelievable. Yeah, just overall those are probably my favorite elements of the movie. And then like we'll get into all the other stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean it's a very interesting plot. I'll read the plot synopsis on IMDb. Travis Henderson, an aimless drifter who has been missing for 4 years, wanders out of the desert and must reconnect with society, himself, his life, and his family. So, interesting plot. Again, the acting is incredible. Harry Dean Stanton is awesome in it. He's been awesome in about every single movie he's been in. I know him predominantly from Alien, the first Alien, but he's obviously had bit parts in movies. He's in Pretty in Pink. He's the dad in Pretty in Pink. He's in a lot of classic roles. So very very iconic actor for sure.
Yeah, I'd say the writing and the acting were both pretty well done. Again, like not a whole lot is actually happening in a lot of the movie, and like the dialogue at times is very like commonplace. But I think that's part of like what makes it so good is like it's a lot of like very like natural conversation, and yeah, it just flows really well.
Yeah, it's very realistic. Very realistic. Yeah. Like a day in the life. A day in the life, if you will. Yeah, and it portrays Texas very well, I feel like. Just, him being in a desolate desert and then going into different areas of Texas and like them road tripping. I think they paint the American West very well. And what's funny is the director, Wim Wenders, is German, and it's like his first like American movie. So there's always, I feel like always a foreign director knows how to like really paint American society very well with their movies. Like this movie, like Drive, Nicholas Winding Refn does like LA very well. I don't know. I think I find that super interesting that these foreign directors have this idea of what America and American society is, or like the West is, and it's their point of view, and it's just very interesting to see, especially in this movie.
Yeah. So I had to read the Wikipedia article for the movie after watching it, so I could try and like wrap my head around what actually happened. But one of the interesting things that was in the Wikipedia page was the director actually said that he kind of portrayed America as like a fantasy land, and like I think that's what kind of drove all these like larger than life kind of shots that are just like picture perfect. Like even when they're in like standing in front of like a junked pickup, it's like somehow pristine. Like and like just like just like unbelievable shots, where like most if you came across most of these scenes, they would either be like extraordinarily commonplace or like places you wouldn't want to actually like spend time in. So like it's kind of a inversion of like what he's filming, and like dichotomy is kind of a big theme throughout the movie, or at least like inversion, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you're also like, you know, Travis is an amnesiac, basically. He wanders out of the desert, and gets found by he goes to a hospital and his brother is called out to, come to the rescue. And you're kind of, you're almost in the point of view of his brother, and Dean Stockwell. And you're along for the ride and trying to learn what happened to Travis, and why he's been missing for 4 years. And I don't know, it's like he comes out of the desert and it's like so beautiful. Maybe he, like, the whole kind of thing is like he went and discovered all this beauty among the chaos, which is crazy. But kind of goes with that like American fantasy, if you will. It's like a fantasy land.
Yeah. And like it's one of the other analyses that I read was that a large component of the movie is Travis's like process of being wild and then becoming civilized and then rejecting civilization in favor of like the wilderness, or in the case of the movie, the road.
Interesting.
And like, yeah, and like I think it portrays that really well, even through the settings, because you start in the completely desolate Texas. His brother comes and whisks him away to Los Angeles, where he spends a decent amount of the movie interacting, with his brother and his family. And then opts to go back to Texas, albeit Houston. So like, a couple rungs down from LA. And then by the end of the movie, he's just completely abandons, urban society in favor of kind of just wandering the road again.
Yeah. And that is a good segue to my kind of analysis of the movie, and like the themes that are kind of present throughout is the mirrors throughout. Like when he goes to a hotel with his brother and he's like trying to get him cleaned up, and he like looks into the mirror for the first time in probably God knows how long, and like kind of like is like, holy shit, like this is who I am. Like that's a super, very subtle but powerful little scene in the movie. And then like the whole, obviously, conversation at the end, that like peep show confession he has with his wife about why he was gone, and it's kind of the payoff of the entire movie. It's it's between a two-way mirror, or technically a one-way mirror that you can almost see, almost is two-way, but you see the reflections of both of them, and it's just like where they were and what they're like realizing, and just the whole plot playing out right in front of them. And it's just like almost like a play, and it's beautiful. And then the ending mirrors the beginning, in my opinion, where he's abandoned his family, and then he realizes he basically has to abandon them again, which is horrible, and leaves. So I think that, again, mirrors is a big part of the movie.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into another analysis that I'll steal. That talks a lot about how there's like a direct like dichotomy of perception that each character has. Travis's is like the most central to the movie, where he kind of has this fantastical perception of his relationship with his wife, and as he grows closer and closer to finding her, and eventually finding her and talking to her, he kind of comes to realize that this fantasy that he had built up in his mind isn't actually reality. And that's one of the reasons that people have argued that he decides to leave in the end, is because he knows that he can't like succumb to that fantasy. And that's ties into a story that he tells his son about his father, who met his mother in Paris, Texas. And his father kind of had a joke where he would tell people that he met his mother or his wife in Paris and then pause and say Texas, which, you know, he says would always get a good laugh. But then he talks about how this joke started to become a delusion for his father, and eventually he believed that his wife was actually from Paris, and kind of developed a like sickness, he calls it, and it ended up kind of like tearing the family apart. So another like perception that doesn't mirror reality.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a it's definitely related to the mirrors that you described, where you know, several times throughout the movie I think characters are faced with a mirror, and I think they all kind of, I think, react differently to having to face reality in some way, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good analysis, and you know, I think the ending is, you know, it's depressing, but it's cyclical almost, where it's, you know, the whole reason he ran away is because of him building up this fantasy of his wife, you know, potentially like, you know, sneaking around and sleeping with other guys potentially, and, you know, not the perfect, you know, woman he thought he married, and it's just, it kind of ate away at him, and then it made him go crazy, and, you know, that's why he disappeared for 4 years. And I think that's one of the main reasons he leaves in the end again, is because he's like, I know, like, my whole goal, like, and I didn't realize this from, like, I thought the whole goal of the movie and of Travis is, like, his character goal was to reunite with his wife and reunite with his son and get everyone back together and live happily ever after. But that wasn't really the goal. It was just to reunite his kid with his wife, his mom, you know, the kid with his mom. And,
yeah, and I think an important part where like it kind of becomes evident to him, I think, that the three of them can't function together. When he's telling his story to Jane, that's basically like their biography, you know, and he describes how she began to like crack under the pressure of his you know, fantasy, and she kind of developed her own fantasy and it was shattered as well. And like, so I think the kind of like that like moment of realization for Travis was that like neither of their fantasies are real, and so their relationship just doesn't really exist the way that either of them want it to. But he still wants his son to be, you know, with his mother.
yeah.
So he kind of takes the step back and, you know, gets out of the picture.
Yeah, it's depressing as hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly why he doesn't, you know, he drives away in the end. And I think he's going to, you know, Paris, Texas, the name of the movie, where he bought this plot of land. And I think he just wants to, you know, I don't know. I just like, he doesn't want to repeat himself. He's learned. It's a great character journey throughout. He's learned. He's like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Like, I think the amnesia in the beginning is kind of like also a like metaphor or whatever for like his for like for like
Metaphor or
his
whatever.
or whatever you call it. But like it's symbolic of, I think, his transition from fantasy to the real world. And like throughout the early parts of his recovery, he kind of asks really dumb questions and like doesn't understand like basic concepts and things like that. And like slowly as he you know, gets back into like the real world, he starts to function like a normal person again. And like by the end, he's like completely articulate and like fully like back to being a complete person.
Yeah.
I think that's part of that like journey, and reflective also of that like cognizance almost that he has at the end, where he's like, I know what I want, but it doesn't make sense, you know?
Yeah. And I think there's a really cool scene where he's in LA staying at his brother's place, where he's walking back and there's a guy on a bridge like screaming and like just kind of crazy, kind of lost his mind, and he kind of just stares at this guy, and like I feel like it's a cool like, hey, I used to be there. I've been there, and like you can get out of this. So I think that's a cool just, transition, if you will, of him realizing this is where I was and this is where I am, and I still need, I still have this journey to go on.
Yeah, and that scene is interesting because the guy's yelling about like the end of the world, basically. And like when Travis first kind of encounters him, he's very like taken aback and like is trying to like walk around him. But then he kind of like hesitates and then like steps behind the guy and kind of like pats him on the shoulder as he like walks by.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's very much a mirror moment of like, I used to be this like person that's like lost, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I agree. It's crazy. I feel like you don't realize that right away watching the movie.
Yeah.
It's only till after when you like start connecting all the dots. And I don't know. I like when movies do that. They make you think, and this one definitely did. It's some heavy content for sure.
Yeah.
Especially, the heartbreak that his brother Walt and his wife Anne have, because they've raised this kid since he was like super young, and since he was like 4, and now he's just about almost 8 years old, and they've raised him, and like, those are pretty incremental years in a kid's life, and they're just, Travis takes his kid away from them. Hunter, they take Hunter away from him.
And even Walt and his wife have like opposed viewpoints on Hunter, where the wife's name is Anne, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anne has a like very steadfast belief that like Hunter is her child, and like that she, that her and Walt raised him, and like they deserve to keep him, and like, for him to be happy with them.
Yeah.
Where Walt is like, this isn't our kid, like we can't keep him. And like it causes some like friction between them that also develops through Travis's stay with them, which is just another example of like, dichotomy or like opposition within the movie.
Yeah, definitely kind of mirrors it. Very mildly mirrors Jane and Travis's kind of relationship, where it's like, Travis is trying to again reunite Jane with Hunter, and he's like, this, obviously this is my kid, but it's like, I can't take care of him. It's not my job. It's the mother's job to do it. So you really sympathize with Anne's position, where she's like, she has that motherly instinct of like, this is my child. Like, I've raised him. So it's heartbreaking for sure. And it's like, who do you side with? And it's such a moral confliction of, what the hell do you do in that situation?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Like one of the things that I found interesting, again while I was reading Wikipedia, was that a lot of
Old Wikipedia.
There's a lot of like a lot of people have tried to classify this movie, and like it is kind of difficult to pin it down into a specific genre. There was a lot of people argue that it's a road movie, which makes sense because it's a lot of travel and like displacement, I guess, is like the best way to describe it. But I actually like the analysis that this is a Western. Because I feel like it leans on a lot of like the Western tropes of like stranger rolls into town. He's kind of like pulled into something that he doesn't necessarily want to be pulled into, and then he has to go on some kind of journey in order to like rectify whatever situation he was pulled into. And then ultimately, in my opinion, in the best Western films, it ends in some sort of tragedy, or at least some like not entirely whole happy ending, which this one does.
Yeah, good point. It's definitely compared to the 50s movies The Searchers with John Wayne. It's compared heavily to that because it has very similar, plot and themes, which is a very good movie. I haven't seen it in a while, but again, Western and kind of ends in tragedy for sure. But I think at this point you should just claim that you wrote the Wikipedia page. Just say that.
No.
I think anyone can write
I'm
Wikipedia
not that
pages. Smart. Yeah, that's like another thing. I was like, this movie's a little smarter than it's definitely a little smarter than my comprehension level.
Yeah. I was like not prepared for it
yeah,
either.
Same.
I was like I kind of, because it's like we knew going into it that it had won awards at Cannes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So like I knew it was going to be kind of an art movie.
Yeah.
But I wasn't prepared how heavy of a metaphorical and like thematic movie it actually turned out to be.
Yeah, and it's a decently long movie. It's about 2 hours and 24 minutes. So it's like it's a lengthy watch, but I thought the pacing was decent and it moved rather quickly. Like again, I was glued to the screen because it was just beautiful and the acting was great. So
yeah, there's not a whole lot of like dead time in the movie, which is nice. It does keep things progressing, despite there not being like any kind of like major like sequences of like plot propulsion, like, if you will.
Yeah.
It's a lot of like very small moments that are just like chained together, which is very interesting.
And it's, again, I think it's kind of a realistic plot. It's just like a day in the life. Like, what do you do? It's just very realistic. But my favorite scene of this movie, and I feel like I'd seen this scene or like heard about this scene prior to the movie, and I didn't know what movie it was from, is when he tries to act like a rich dad and dresses up in a suit and goes to pick up Hunter from school, and they're walking across the street kind of mimicking each other. They're across, on each side of the street, and they're mimicking each other and being goofy and stuff, and I love that. It just shows like the bonding that they're starting to have after, all this time away. That's the best scene of the movie in my opinion.
Yeah.
So
I liked I thought it was funny when they're eating like fast food in the back of his
I do like that, yeah.
pickup.
Yeah.
And he's just like I need to leave. And the kid's like, "Well, why?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go find your mother." And the kid's like, "Well, I'm coming with you." He's like, "Oh, okay." Like it's like that's kind of like the moment, I think, where they like really like the bond is like solidified.
Yeah,
as,
and they,
like father and son.
And they have this kind of detective of like, we got walkie-talkies and let's try. They're almost like kids. and they're like trying to find their mother, and it's great. So I watched it. It's on HBO Max. I enjoyed it. I don't know, I might watch it again in my lifetime. It's one of those heavy movies that you only watch a few times, a couple times. But I'd recommend it. I think it's worth a watch.
Yeah, I think so. It's good. I wasn't disappointed that I watched it in any way. So
well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Yeah. Like going back to your text. Well, I didn't dislike it. It's like yeah. So, all right. Well, hope you guys enjoy it, and hope you enjoyed this podcast. And we'll talk to you later.